And we can just start.
I think we can start.
I think we can start.
Let's do it.
So today our topic is mental health, wellness, menopause, stress, brain fog, all of that crazy mental health stuff.
All right. So a big part of what we're going to talk about is stress. I don't know if anybody here has ever not experienced stress. But stress isn't always all bad. I know we always think about it as the bad stress, but we need stress. We need stress in our life, and it's completely 100% normal, and it can be okay. We all experience it. We all have the capacity to recover from it if we are given take the time and opportunity to do so. And if we recover from stress, well, we can thrive. You know, our stress response, we have a stressor, our body does a bunch of stuff, which we'll get into, and then it's supposed to go down, and then you have like a new normal, and that's okay, and you're supposed to be there. But it's when we start having that kind of high stress all the time, which we'll talk about in a minute, where we kind of run into trouble. And we'll also talk about the connection of hormones and menopause and the stress response as well, and how it's all related. And hopefully give you some tips and tricks other than wine. So, okay, just a little, as we know, most of us have experienced stressors. We have our social stressors, so stresses in relationships, loneliness, which is one of the big reasons we just did this, because I don't know about you guys, but even COVID especially, I think, created a lot of loneliness in our communities and within ourselves. For being so connected worldwide, we're so disconnected. Like we don't get together with our girlfriends often enough. Interpersonal conflict, rejection, lack of community, social exclusion, and inequality are kind of our social stressors. Physical, we have injuries. I don't know about you guys, but I get injured now and it takes forever and so frustrating, and I have to go back to the doctor for my knee, and then when I can't do something because my knee hurts, then I get frustrated, then I don't want to do anything. Illnesses, overtraining, if we are somebody who is working out a lot, poor sleep, which we always talk about, toxic substances. We got our existential stresses, so if we're feeling hopeless, despair, lack of meaning, inability to cope with life. Some of these transitions while we're in this phase, we could be retiring maybe, or our kids have left the house, and now we're kind of like, oh, now what's my job? What's my role? Who am I? And what am I going to do with the rest of my life? So those existential crises. Our emotional, we've got grief, anger, shame, all the things. We've got our environmental, which I don't think we think a lot of because we live in this beautiful space up here, but it can be a massive stressor when we have light pollution, noise pollution, the air quality, things like that can be a stressor as well. Discrimination, violence, inaccessibility, distractions, all those kinds of things are within our environmental stressors. And of course, mental, decision fatigue, change fatigue, and like switching languages. Like there's just so many things that can cause us so much stress in our lives. And when it's happening with menopause, like menopause doesn't happen in a vacuum. Hormones aren't the only cause. We need to look at what else is causing the stress in our life and what can we change? What do we have the power to change? So, like I kind of talked about, all stressors involve some type of physiological response. Most of us are probably used to hearing these. We've got our fight. Some of us are fighters. Some of us flee. Some of us will freeze, faint, or dissociate, or completely numb out. And when I'm 2 hours into a Facebook scroll, and I'm like, oh, why did I just spend 2 hours doing that? And then the guilt and the shame comes in because I've just wasted 2 hours of my life. But I'm like, there's something that's making me numb out on social media. That's huge. That's one of my things. I actually put a little timer on my phone, like your social media says you need to stop. Or we fawn. We make ourselves less threatening to others by trying to please and placate them. And as women, unfortunately, I think this is more often than not. I like to see our strong young women coming up through the ranks these days. But for a lot of us, this is what we do. These are all completely normal, natural responses. And it can be very life-saving in dangerous situations. but not the most useful on a daily consistent basis, and that's what we're going to talk about mostly. And why is it important? Whoop. Yes. Sorry, Maggie.
No.
Yeah, we're good. Oh, yes.
Slide change, please.
Okay, yeah. You might have the problem.
I know, you're not reading my mind, Maggie.
Sorry, I'm going to stare into your eyes.
Next. So stress is normal and not all bad. It helps protect us. It helps us stay focused and energetic. It boosts our performance. So if you're in competition or you've got something exciting coming up, you get that little boost of adrenaline. It encourages growth. It motivates action. It can also freeze us, but it can improve cognitive function. It increases our resilience when we get through something. We're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. I know when I used to manage years ago, and I used to get really anxious over tough conversations because I hated conflict. And I would like work myself up into this massive tizzy about what this conversation is going to go like and how this person is going to, react to me. And then I'd have the conversation and it would go so smoothly. And I'm like, why did I stress so much over that? And I always wanted one of those Staples buttons, well, that was easy. So it increases our resilience. I learned a lot from that. And it can promote adaptability. So stress isn't always bad. Lindsay.
A little bit of neurobiology and neurochemistry. So the stress response is the same axis from the brain as the hormones, like ovarian hormones. It starts in the hypothalamus, brain, moves to the pituitary. So there's a release of CRH, which is a neurohormone, down into the pituitary, which stimulates the adrenals to produce cortisol, fight or flight, run from that saber-toothed tiger. Acute stress, like Angie was saying, short-term activation, the cortisol increases, you get out of dodge or do whatever you need, and then levels return to normal. The difference in acute stress, which can be healthy, and chronic stress is when you're chronically stressed, this pattern, this axis is overstimulated, sustained activation. The cortisol actually can't keep up, and there can be an overproduction or an underproduction of cortisol, and it can affect us in many, many different ways, which I will allude to next slide. Good stress and bad stress. Again, acute prompts healthy action, helps you adapt, versus chronic prompts unhealthy action and traps you in a vicious stress cycle. Cortisol.
Cortisol.
Is it the root of all evil?
It can be, but it helps control inflammation, and estrogen affects cortisol as well. So it's not all our fault. There is some hormones at play with this. So we're kind of like, I see it as we're kind of fighting an uphill battle, especially during these wild fluctuations in the perimenopause. I would say after a couple years after menopause, after your estrogen kind of levels out at its new low normal, things tend to level out, but you can still have an increase in inflammation. Too much cortisol can worsen menopause symptoms like weight gain, mood swings, and poor sleep. And the wild fluctuations of estrogen during perimenopause disrupts the stress response, leading to higher cortisol levels and increased inflammation. I think that was all I wanted to say about that one. Yeah.
And the axis is the same, like thyroid stimulating hormone, gonadotropin stimulating hormone. It's all that same axis, so you can understand that there's a deep and complex interplay between them. Next slide, please, Maggie. Chronic stress obviously can have effects on every system of our body. Physical health, long-term health consequences, mental health, which we will talk more about as this discussion goes on. You can have effects on our behaviors, on our relationships, and our overall well-being.
Yeah. Like the elevated cortisol and the increase in stress can absolutely affect our heart health. So if, as we get older, if maybe we're somebody who's always generally stressed out, we want to start thinking about our heart health, our brain health. Like stress really impacts every part of our body. Our immune system, it can suppress our immune system, chronic stress. I don't know, I just kind of went through an example today where I don't know if you've ever like been work, you got a vacation coming, you finally get to go on vacation, and day 2, guess what you've got? You've got an ear infection, an eye infection, you've got a cold, you've got the flu, something happens because now your body's finally like, taking that downtime, and now your immune system is in the craps. And now you're catching everything. Muscle tension and pain. A lot of us store our muscle or our stress in our shoulders. We can store it in our pelvic region. For me, my stress goes right to my guts. If I'm worried or stressed about something, my stomach's just completely in knots. So the gastrointestinal problems and obviously sleep disorders as well, and exacerbates menopause symptoms. So now we are going to ask you guys to...
Next slide, please, Maggie.
We're going to get you to yell out, maybe just one at a time though, some stressors that you have been experiencing at this phase of life. I don't love the term midlife, but that's where we are. So,
What are some particular stressors in this stage of life?
Teenage children. Yes. Senior citizens, so our parents, sandwich generation.
Both kids and taking care
Yeah,
of
if you haven't
parents.
heard that term yet, the sandwich generation, maybe we're taking care of aging, sick, ailing parents, but we still have to run our kids to all of their extracurricular activities and such, and that is extremely stressful. And as a single parent. What else?
Stressors?
Financial.
Especially in this day and age with the way
Who else has stress?
financial stress.
Managing work and home.
Managing work and home.
Work-life balance.
Yeah, work-life balance. Who has work-life balance?
Who strives for
Yeah,
it?
who strives for it? Who succeeds? Sometimes.
Yeah.
What else? Who else has stressors at midlife? Yeah. Here. Training, like as in like strength training?
Yeah.
Skiing, whatever it is, training for something.
Athletic training.
Athletic training, yeah. Coaching your kids.
Yeah.
Who was the next one over here? Yeah.
Politics.
Politics. That one came up today as well. Oh my gosh. Don't get me started. Yeah. Whew. There was more hands up I saw over here first. Was there anybody else on that side? I did see some initially, but okay,
back
let's
there?
move back here. Yes.
Loss of a
loved one, and whether that's like cutting off ties with somebody or a physical loss of somebody we love, right? We go through a lot of relationship changes. Yeah. Working towards thinking about retirement. Can I retire in this financial? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Our health, huge stressor.
I'm pointing to one person.
Oh,
You're
sorry.
pointing to
Yeah,
another.
Go ahead. Who else did we?
There's someone right here.
Separation.
Yep. Separation. Yeah.
Changing relationships.
Yeah. Sometimes our kids moving back home after they actually left, and now all of a sudden our forks and knives have disappeared again. Yeah, I don't know where they go. Cutlery fairy takes them because nobody in the house has them until you look under everybody's bed.
Also, children leaving, right? Like the empty nest thing. Like, oh,
Yeah.
now what?
What's some other stressors at this phase of life?
I was
Allison.
just gonna call it like loss of identity, like when kids move out. maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Who am I now, and what am I doing with my time and my life? And some people love retirement and know exactly what they're going to do, and some people get really lost, or when the kids move out. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Those are great. When we did it today, the first thing that was said was every little thing. Every little thing my husband does, she says. You are chewing. You are breathing. Yeah. Yeah, everything and everyone. I think we kind of decided is that hormones? Or is that just like we're at a point in our lives where we're just really sick of your shit? Like, I understand now why my mom said, I have one nerve left and you are on it. I heard that a lot. And I don't think I was a bad kid, but I think she was just like, I'm done. All right, next, Maggie. Oh, I think this was you, Lindsay.
So we can certainly have mood changes during the menopause transition and menopause itself. There can be mood changes and low mood, or there can be depression or something in between. Now, there's increased risk of menopause in the menopause transition, but it's not actually a causal. Menopause causes depression. It's much more complex than that. And when I talk to patients in my office, we're working through whether this patient has actual depression or periodic low mood, there's a certain set of questions that many of you may have already heard, that you would have to have symptoms for at least 2 weeks. Symptoms usually include low mood, low energy, low appetite or increased appetite, changes in your sleeping habits, loss of interest in activities that you used to really enjoy doing, decreased motivation, and often, sometimes even suicidal ideation. Depression is treated very differently than normal mood fluctuations in the menopause transition, and there are certain risk factors that we found in the literature that have been linked to higher risk of depression in the menopause transition. So the most predictive factor is a personal history of clinical depression before menopause. It makes a lot of sense, but that is the thing that's most predictive of whether or not you are at risk of depression in menopause. History of PMS, premenstrual syndrome, can put you at higher risk of depression in menopause. History of postpartum depression, again, it makes sense, can put you at higher risk of depression in menopause. The transition is, again, as I mentioned, and also people who have suffered what in the clinical world we call ACEs now, so adverse clinical events, or childhood events, so trauma, childhood trauma, so history of abuse or trauma can also put you at increased risk of depression in the menopause period. So it's really important to delineate whether this is just a low mood or something that needs more attention from a healthcare provider or professional.
Maggie?
Oh yes.
I got you.
Thank you.
We're on it.
Other things that I get asked a lot in my practice about mood changes during hormone cycling is PMS, and then there's PMDD, which is called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and that is kind of the extreme version of PMS. There's a really good article that I often share with patients out of the American Academy of Family Physicians about diagnosis and treatment options with premenstrual dysphoria disorder. 10 days to 1 week before your period starts, there's extreme fluctuations in mood, extreme fluctuations in energy, appetite, sleep, and often these people need treatment. It's important to distinguish between clinical depression and PMDD because the treatments do differ. There's been some studies to show that there are certain vitamins that can actually help with the symptoms of PMDD, including vitamin B6, vitamin E, calcium, magnesium, and tryptophan. And also we can use, if the symptoms are very disturbing to the patient, oral contraceptive medications can be a discussion, or antidepressants like SSRIs can be helpful in PMDD in a cyclical way. So not your typical everyday, but actually in the 2 weeks leading up to your period has been shown to be effective. Menopause-related depression, which we were talking about on the last slide, the way to distinguish it, it's non-cyclic and it's at least 2 weeks of the symptoms that I described earlier. Maggie? Anxiety. Increased risk of anxiety in the menopause transition and through menopause. Up to around, I think the average is 30% of women will experience anxiety disorders in this period, compared to 19% of men. So it's a real significant difference in gender. It often increases during the late perimenopause, that hormonal chaos that we've spoken about in previous sessions, and that's been shown in studies comparing high and low anxiety levels. If you have anxiety and depression both, which seem like opposite in terms of the symptomatology, anxiety is more worry, fear, panic. And the thing about anxiety and depression is the most important thing is, are these symptoms affecting your quality of life? And when you have anxiety and depression, that can actually deteriorate your quality of life, obviously. Is this affecting relationships? Is this affecting work? Is this affecting your day-to-day ability to enjoy life? One of my big peeves is the lack of research in women's health. So there is, like with many other topics, a lack of research in midlife anxiety. Hopefully that'll change in the coming years. Do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say with anxiety, I was never really an anxious person, but I started, like I would be driving somewhere at night and I would think, oh my God, that car is going to veer into the opposite lane. I'm going to get a head-on collision. And then I would ruminate on things that I never thought of before. I would think like every little bad thing I ever thought I did as a parent to my kid, and then I started sending my 16-year-old all these things saying, I'm so sorry how terrible I was as a parent, and like it just kept, this tape just kept playing in my brain, and this is not how I historically thought. So these intrusive thoughts were all very new for me, and I thought, what is wrong? And then my 16-year-old was like, Mom, it wasn't that bad, you're okay. Like, stop sending me this shit, really. Like, stop apologizing, it's okay. I'm like, if you need therapy, I'll pay for it. And so that anxiety for me, for somebody who was like a pretty chill person, and the kind of those low moods on a consistent basis was a little bit eye-opening, I guess. I really had to make a conscious decision to be aware of my thoughts and my mindfulness and taking the time to de-stress myself. So some of the best treatments that we have, and one of the things that I personally love, is exercise. If physical activity was a drug, every doctor would prescribe it and every person would take it because it literally impacts every single part of our body.
And in the studies, it's equally as effective as any medication, SSRI. Exercise is equal in efficacy for treatment of both depression and anxiety.
Yeah, so it really is, we have to get moving, and we don't move enough. The studies do show that I think it's about 7% of women, I think it was the SWAN study, women's health across the nation. Sweeping across, yeah. It was a huge study that tracked women over time, a long period of time, and there was about 7% of women within the menopausal years that were actually getting the minimum recommended amount of physical activity, which is 150 minutes of moderate activity. Moderate meaning you can talk, but you can't sing, and that's the minimum. We should be getting about 300 if we can get it in, which seems like a monumental amount of time these days. And yes, absolutely. I mean, we are going to talk about strength training in another one.
Is that per week or what is that?
150 minutes per week. So 30 minutes, 5 days a week. But strength training is incredibly important as well, and we're going to talk more about that in the bone health.
Yeah, and that's also, and you only need twice a week. You don't need something crazy. Anyway, that's another time. But regular physical activity helps improve our mood. It reduces anxiety and enhances overall well-being. And we live in a beautiful place. We can just get outside, spend as much time as you can in nature. I used to go running at Limberlost. If I had like a stressful day, I'd have one of the little loops at Turtle Lake, I think it is. And I remember just trucking along there one day, and I had a hat on, so I had like a ball cap down here, and I didn't see this, like a branch.
Oh no.
It knocked me on my ass. I have not been knocked. I was just like, because I was mad. Then I was running, it was going down, and I didn't see it, and I just went bang, and right down. I thought,
like, wake up.
Does somebody have a camera? Because that would have been really funny. Anyway, but it helps. Like, by the time I did that loop for half an hour, I was just like, okay, I feel so much better. But it's easier to just hunker down sometimes. Our diet, I think we don't eat enough fruits and veggies. We talked about it once in a different one where now fruit's the enemy. People say, well, I shouldn't be eating fruit. It has too many sugar. Please eat the fruit. We'll talk about that in another one. That's
we have a nutrition march.
Yes.
Is our nutrition session.
Just please eat the fruit. I mean, if you're diabetic and there's other things there, that's very, very different. You have to watch what you're eating, but please eat the fruit. Obviously, whole grains, lots of fiber. I've never thought so much about fiber in my life. I eat my bran buds every morning. I put my I know, aren't they great? Those bran buds are fabulous.
They work well.
They do. My ground flaxseed, like fiber, is king right now. I think it's gonna be the new trend. Who needs keto when you have fiber?
That would be a great trend.
Right? It is a great trend. Other than the bloating. My stomach doesn't like the lentils so much, but. Food containing omega-3 fatty acids, supplement if you have to, but preferably through food if you can get it. That all supports mental health, brain health. I think there's evidence to show that omega-3s help with dry eyes and things like that as well. Our sleep, of course, as we talked about in the last one, sleep is the foundation upon which all health is built. We need to get some sleep, so establishing a regular sleep routine and creating a restful environment, taking a sleepcation from our partners.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, I like that one. I still talk about that one. Whoever said, somebody had mentioned that the new architectural trend is to have 2 master bedrooms in a home, and I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm definitely doing that. Yeah. I can have my own tub. Anyway, I can have as many fucking pillows on my bed as I want. It's my bed. Okay. Next.
So when the stress is more than stress and you actually have a diagnosis of a mood disorder, when you actually have clinical depression or anxiety, again, it's really important to seek help, whether it's through a therapist, to start a friend. Talking about it is so important. We're talking about it because the rates are increased in the menopause transition. The first line therapy is just like with sleep disturbances and insomnia, cognitive behavioral therapy or other psychotherapy-based treatments. It's very effective as exercise, even more if you do both. And then another of the first line treatments are medication. And typically, it's always an informed discussion with my patients, risks versus benefits like with any other medication. When I do the screening, we usually get an objective number in the patient health questionnaire that I use, and that helps kind of guide my recommendations, but it's ultimately always up to the patient. But medication like SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, citalopram, escitalopram, paroxetine, duloxetine.
What are the brand names of citalopram?
Oh yeah, so citalopram is Celexa, escitalopram is Cipralex. No pharma company is giving me any money for telling you the brand names, I promise. Duloxetine is Cymbalta. That's a SNRI, a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, a different neurochemical. Safe and effective. Obviously, there's side effects, and there can be risks, so it's worthwhile to have a fulsome conversation with your healthcare provider. But it's been shown to be very effective for treatment of moderate to severe depression. And the bonus is it can actually, some of the SSRIs can help, as mentioned in our perimenopause session, menopause-related symptoms like the vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes and night sweats, and some of the somatic complaints as well. Next slide, please. So first line, cognitive behavioral therapy, other types of therapy and medication. Second, and this is all in addition to the lifestyle things, the base, the rock bottom base is all the moving your body, eating well, sleeping well. That's like the cornerstone of health. When you need more, first line is CBT and medication. Second line, although not a current part of our guidelines of indications for treatment with hormone therapy or menopause hormone therapy, in the literature, estrogen therapy transdermally has been shown to improve mood and depression symptoms, especially and most importantly in that perimenopausal phase. So not postmenopausally, there's not the same effect, but there's some good literature to say that there can be a help with estrogen. It can also improve sleep and quality of life, which is always and often the goal, but obviously more research is needed. And again, the only indications for menopause hormone therapy in my line of work is vasomotor symptoms, genitourinary symptoms of menopause, or severe osteoporosis and risk of osteoporotic fracture. That may change in the coming years, but that's what we're going through. And then if that is not helping, you can add all the other things, including antidepressant and estrogen, to see if that can help with mood. Haha. I'm going to run away. I'm going to get some tea.
Just a quick note about CBT, because I've had a few questions about it before. I do have a couple of books over there, some of my own personal books that I've got. So this with CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, the studies show that even if you do a self-directed one with a book or something like that, it still can be as effective. So you don't have to find a provider that provides it. If you're somebody who likes or does well with self-help books and actually finishes them, I never finish it. That's why these usually sit on my nightstand. I'm one of those people that have like 18 books on their nightstand, all with various, bookmarks in them. Anyways, so yeah, once you have, after you feel free to take a look at any of the books that I have over there. But just some myths that we wanted to talk about, because that's often myths and misinformation. Hormone therapy is not safe, so we do still have some physicians that quote the old WHI studies. Hopefully that changes over time. Menopause hormone therapy can be safe for many women. It's not right for all women. So anybody who's out there saying all women need to be on estrogen for brain health, for heart health, that's not the case. There's lots of women that have thrived and lived without ever taking estrogen. So don't feel like you have to. Don't have major FOMO. But it is safe for those of us that is something that we want to consider. And we don't have contraindications for. Adrenal fatigue, you hear this a lot. It's not a medical diagnosis. I always kind of say if the person who diagnoses you with something also sells you the cure, then I would just be a little bit skeptical. Our adrenals don't cack out. Our adrenals do work unless you actually have adrenal insufficiency. That is a medical diagnosis, and that is something that needs to be treated and tested for. But it's very rare. It is very rare, yeah, but it does happen. Adrenal insufficiency, but it is extremely rare. I don't know what the percentage is, but and so adrenal fatigue itself isn't an actual medical diagnosis. We want to be really careful when we're looking at that. Again, lifestyle changes, some stress change, some decreasing stressors in our life where we can is important. Menopause itself causes depression. It doesn't. It as we talked about. Menopause, if you have a history of depression or any major depressive episodes, that can be the biggest risk factor. They kind of say too, like however your puberty went might kind of mirror how your menopause goes. So if you were one of those crazy raging hormonal teenagers, you might be a crazy raging hormonal adult. Maybe, unless you can, you've got a little bit more mindfulness now. And the menopause always means mood swings, depression, anxiety, and brain fog. It doesn't always mean that. This is not our mother's menopause. It means lots of other things, and I think we should be empowered to embrace this phase of life and ride the storm. If it is a bit of a storm, get help, because we don't have to suffer with anything, and menopause doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's always lots of factors. So I've had people that have said, hormone therapy, nothing worked for me. I was like, well, how's your diet? Are you moving your body? How is your sleep? Because if you don't have those building blocks, if you don't have that figured out, the hormone therapy might not be the answer. Now, if it's the hot flashes that are keeping you up at night, then maybe the antidepressants or the gabapentin or whatever it is you're getting yourself to sleep with helps that, then absolutely it may help. It's kind of like, a bit of a loop there, a cycle. But just get the help you need. Talk to people about it. Advocate for yourself. Lindsay offered herself kind of. There was somebody today who had mentioned that their family doctor isn't comfortable talking about hormone therapy or other options. So she said, where do we go to get this information in town? And we said, this is what we're working on.
I actually went online, and the Menopause Foundation of Canada, which we'll have in our last slide, actually has a menopause symptom tracker. It's the Menopause Foundation of Canada. It has a menopause symptom tracker and a whole section on before you go to your healthcare provider. And it actually takes you through steps. You should get tracking your symptoms, and it goes through a bunch of steps, which I found very helpful as a provider.
Oh, yeah.
This is your brain on menopause.
Everybody here will remember those commercials too. Frying the egg.
This is your brain on drugs.
That was the, what was that president's wife? Was that the Reagan?
Yeah.
Was it
Nancy
Reagan's?
Reagan.
It was Nancy Reagan's big.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is by a very smart and brilliant woman who is passionate about women's brain health, Dr. Lisa Mosconi. She holds a PhD in, I think, neuroscience or neurobiology. I think I have her book over there. And also, I think, in nuclear medicine. So she's very unique. She's a couple different PhDs, and she's a researcher, and she does a lot of research on... Did I not bring it? Ah, crap. See?
Menopause brain.
No, I'm just kidding. Too many books is what I have. Anyway, so she does a lot of research on Alzheimer's and women's health because it's not well studied. But she also is doing a lot of research on perimenopause and menopause and how it impacts the female brain. And in her book, which is phenomenal, it's called The Menopause Brain, she talks about like how we see menopause as bikini medicine because we're often reduced to the function of our ovaries and we're only really useful for reproductive. That was sarcasm. For those of you who don't know me. We are, for those of us who never wanted to reproduce, like why am I reduced to the function of my ovaries if that was never something I wanted to do just because I was born like that? So she's makes a very valid point. A lot of this stuff originates in the brain. So this is why a lot of our symptoms can be relieved with medications that impact various parts of our brain. So it's exciting. There's lots of research coming out.
But we're way behind.
Way
right?
Way behind. Because really, like, what were we talking about today? I can't remember if you were in the room, but menopause. Oh, it was pelvic health. That's what it was. We were talking about pelvic floor therapy being offered to people around the time of childbearing.
Reproduction.
And, well, yes, when we're reproducing, but then not offered or not talked about for those of us later in life when we're afraid to go outside or afraid to do exercise because now we're peeing our pants and we're jumping up and down or we have pain. And these things impact our mental health. If I can't leave my house without feeling like I have to wear something, or if I don't want to go exercise, I can't jump on the trampoline with my kids, I can't do the things I used to love to do because either I'm in pain because my uterus is falling out or my bladder has fallen, or I'm dribbling, or even having full incontinence, then we start to isolate ourselves and we start to become depressed and lonely. So it's all interrelated, right?
And we're talking about all that fun stuff in our body changes in April.
In pelvic health, yeah, it's one of my favorite things. I could talk about vaginas all day. But yeah, that's the brain on menopause, essentially. I don't ask me about what all this means. There's like some glucose something going on. And
Can you skip the next slide and just go to the final one? So, oh my gosh, oh no.
Oh no.
Our surprise guest has been revealed in the final slide.
Animal! No.
And it's not animal. We have invited a surprise guest who's very, very special, near and dear to my heart, and many women here, I'm sure. Allie Chisholm-Smith is a yoga instructor and a yoga teacher trainer. She has been practicing and teaching yoga, practicing for longer, but teaching yoga for 27 years. She is an asset to our community. For those of you who don't know her, I'm so happy to introduce the wonderful Allie Chisholm-Smith.
Thanks, honey. Yay, hi, everybody. Wow, this light's really blinding.
I know.
Who knew? One of the symptoms that we haven't talked about is how menopause gets your hair to straighten. Has anyone else had that impact? Like I suddenly have straight hair for the first time in my life. Okay, so what I'm really here to talk to you about is, I guess, cortisol primarily, and how to get control of it. So as Lindsay said, I'm a yoga teacher. If you don't know who I am, I've been teaching for a long time, started in Toronto, moved up here in '99. So some people think that I only teach restorative yoga. Because I move slowly,
Closer to the mic. It was hard
a
to hear
little
you back there.
Can you hear me now? Excellent. I have a terrible quiet voice. It's really good for yoga. It's really terrible for hard of hearing people.
I'm the yelling mummy.
Right? So yeah, people think I do restorative yoga, but it's because I do things slowly. So I really believe in not going into your yoga poses freaking out. So a lot of what I do is around calming us down. So we start in Shavasana. This is a big long story, but it's so important to take that time to dial yourself down. And I'll go into a lot of detail about that. I think what's missing in the conversation, like that was so great what you guys talked about. One of the things that's missing, though, that we're not talking about is the necessity of rest. And, you know, our ancestors, we think back to our ancestors, like caveman days or agro days, their lives were such that there were pockets of stress, and like war, famine, disease would come along and everyone would freak out and figure out how to get through it. What is our life like now? Right? So we have this chronic stress going through that we're never dialing down. One of the ways I metaphor it in yoga is if you think about when your computer goes to sleep, so the screen goes to sleep, that's kind of stress. So what happens when you're in a stressful place is all of your faculties go toward, my life is at stake, so I need to run away from the saber-toothed tiger. That tiger might not really exist. It might be you're dealing with poverty, you've got bills you can't pay, or your marriage is ending, or whatever is happening for you, but it's seen as life-threatening. So every resource you have is funneled into that. And that same stress can come through when we do great things like exercise, run and bonk ourselves on the head with a tree. All of those things. There needs to be a time, like we're so loopy now that we kind of have to impose rest into our lives in order to get ourselves balanced again. And when you bring yourself to a restful place, you nudge the mouse. So when you nudge the mouse, your screen comes alive. You can digest your food again. Your blood can circulate a little bit more slowly and effectively. You can think again. So we're killing ourselves with stress, and we're not remembering that we need the antidote, which is deep constructive rest. So what does that mean? I'm just making sure I've got. Other thing I love that you guys were talking about is negative stress versus positive stress. There's a really good movement in the psychotherapeutic circles to say, isn't excitement sometimes stressful? When you're really excited about something. So is there room in our world to expand our vocabulary around what stress is? So that when I'm really excited about coming up here and talking to you guys, I'm not at the same time thinking, oh, sweet Jesus, my life is at stake. Because that's not it. I'm just excited. Or I'm nervous. So to expand our vocabulary is really important because our cells are listening to our words. And they're hearing us freaking out. And then all the little battle guys are going to the front lines, okay? Okay, so, oh yeah, I wanted to say this one thing. So I've been teaching for a while. When I first started teaching in the 90s, I found people yawned within the first few minutes of class. There would be this chorus, I call it the YPMs, the yawns per minute. 10 years later, it was taking 15 minutes, 20 minutes for people to start to yawn. Now, it can take the whole class, or it can never really take in. And if you've been to my class, and I'm like, yes, you're yawning, we're in. Because the yawn is the marker that you're finally shifting out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's the marker. It's like, oh, I'm starting to drop. So I've really seen it in my career. I've really seen a change. And remember, I started in the city. So those yawns per minute were in the city. They were in Toronto. It wasn't up here. So what I have to do, my hard sell, is that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is rest. And by rest, I don't necessarily mean go for a paddle, go for a walk. Sometimes rest means you can't go for a walk, you can't go for a paddle because you're so in a place of rest. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about the vagus nerve. So for me, I have to sell, and Carolyn Van Dyken will talk about this as well, is talking about the factors that make us healthy, good social network, exercise, right? Nutrition, rest. Rest is the other one. So what is the vagus nerve? And I might be doing bad science, but the yoga world's full of bad science, so it's super fun to bash about. What we want to activate, from my understanding, and I did make sure I Googled it, Dr. Google, before I came out, because he's always right. The vagus nerve, it has this huge role in setting our systems back to a place of rest and digest. So here's my quote from Dr. Google, which is actually from the National Library of Medicine, which I hope is real. Okay. No, really, anyway. The vagus nerve is the main nerve of the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. So parasympathetic is your rest and digest, right? Sympathetic, saber-tooth tiger. The vagus nerve regulates metabolic homeostasis by controlling heart rate, gastrointestinal motility, Miss Gastro, and secretion, pancreatic, endocrine, and exocrine secretion, hepatic glucose production, and other visceral functions. No more big words. In addition, the vagus nerve is a major constituent of a neural reflex mechanism, the inflammatory reflex, that controls innate immune responses and inflammation during pathogen invasion and tissue injury. So what does that mean? The vagus nerve, here's my way of saying this. When we allow ourselves to become quite sleepy and restful, we trigger the vagus nerve to go into action. The vagus nerve sends a serum to your heart and through your nervous system, and that serum slows your heart rate down, calms your nervous system, and in fact is said to travel through your body and lower your rates of inflammation. That's like a total Reader's Digest version. So when you're battling with your immune system, you need that healthy fortification of that vagus serum to then fight off the antigens. So the vagus nerve is really important. When you activate your vagus nerve, it's like between wake and sleep. So it's like you're kind of too out of it to do anything productive. But when you go to that place, you are going to start to heal. And your cells have two ways they can be, two modes. They can either be in protection mode or growth mode. Growth is healing. The minute your body senses protection need, growth is done. No more healing. So it's actually a practice for me, 30 years into teaching yoga, to start to really recognize how many times I tell myself my life is at stake. How many times do I tell myself I need protection instead of I've got this. So start to notice that pattern in yourself is really interesting. So how do we activate the vagus nerve? It's actually quite simple. One really great way is to elongate your exhale. So let's do this together. Close your eyes for a minute. If you could all just lie on the floor, it'd be much more familiar to me. So I want you to close your eyes and just initiate your inhale right in the base of your belly, like right in the pelvic floor. And if you could inhale to about a count of 8, so you could do your Mississippis, or you could do Om 1, Om 2, right? But when you're exhaling, can you go to 12 or 14? When I'm really doing a vagus nerve jobby on myself, I will try to exhale to 22 or 24. Still only inhaling to 8. So you're going to squeeze the belly beyond the point at which you have breath. And then there's this little panic inside, this anxiety comes up like, I'm going to die of exhale. So what a great practice to see, well, that's not true, because inhales are going to happen no matter what. So your anxiety, as it normally is lying to you. So instead of freaking out on the inhale, just wait for it and let it slowly come in. So if we were to practice that for a few minutes, I bet even now you have a little bit of shoulder dropping. Yeah, amazing. Some yawning. Woohoo! We yawn. So that's a really great way to activate your vagus nerve. And part of it is just the practice of recognizing when your anxiety is lying to you and when you actually have your own back and you really are okay. Another thing you can do that's super quirky, and maybe we can spread rumors about you by doing this. You know in India, the ubiquitous nod? If you imagine that your nose, the tip of your nose, is just tracing a little figure 8, just try it with me. Don't leave me hanging. Just like little. Oh, it's really fast actually. So you could imagine you're like the bobblehead in the taxi, right? Now make it smaller. Barely discernible, little Indian ubiquitous nod. That activates your nervous system. I mean, what was I talking about? Vagus nerve. That was a brain moment. So that's a really great thing to do. So the Buddhist monks that meditate for hours on end, that's what they do. They do these figure 8s. It keeps them calm and it keeps the vagus nerve active. There are times where I've had pretty acute pain in the past few years, I would say particularly. I was telling Lindsay I was having something that felt a lot like that thing that Dr. Google keeps telling me about, which is gluteal tendinopathy. I couldn't stretch it. Stretching hurt it, like really hurt it. The only thing I could do is what I just did with you. So in my morning practice, I lay on the ground and I just tried to activate my rest and digest system as deeply as possible. It was the only thing that was working to get my pain down. And again, Carolyn Van Dyken will talk about that, your cycle of pain, if you've ever been to see the gynecological wizards at PhysioWorks. They talk a lot.
They're going to be at our session
they have
on body
to.
changes. Yeah.
Great. So again, looking at that pain connection that's actually in the brain and what we're telling ourselves and how we can interrupt it through things like the vagus nerve. When I don't sleep, I joke in my classes that I have opportunities to get to know myself around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And what I do now is I will try to do that elongated exhale, or I'll try my figure 8s. The other thing I'll do, which might seem a bit odd, is I want to interrupt the perseverating brain, right? Where you go loop, loop, loop. So I name body parts alphabetically. I never or seldomly do I ever get to H. Because if you get your brain to fixate on something really boring, you'll tap out. It's so effective. Someone told me to name cars alphabetically or countries alphabetically. It's so good. It's sort of mind numbing, but it also so now the minute I hear arches, ankles, Achilles, I'm like, oh. Right? It really works. So you start to trigger yourself into these places where then rest becomes a habit, not just freaking out becoming your habit. Does that make sense to you guys? So if you do yoga or you do martial arts, even going to work out and run, can you start that by getting relaxed? I know that sounds like a weird thing if you're running to relieve stress, but try to get a deeper breath first. Get yourself out of battle with yourself, then do your workout. Do your yoga, do your tai chi, whatever it is, but try to tap into that vagus nerve first. Yeah? Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, Allie, for your all and ever wisdom.
There was lots of yawning.
Did you? Yeah? Was there yawning out there? I think, is there? No. Yeah, here's the key takeaway. I'm sorry we ran over time. Thank you for staying. We stayed a bit late. Or we started a bit late. Menopause Foundation of Canada was where that menopause symptom tracker, what to prepare before you talk to your provider. And please increase our stats and fill out the post questionnaire. Questions. Does anyone have any questions while you're filling out your questionnaires before you leave?
We're all too relaxed to ask questions now. Yeah.
You had mentioned about the like the transdermal estradiol.
Estradiol.
Estradiol, thank you. Not being part of the recommendations like here in Canada. I think you're referring to. Is there a country that you're aware of like where that is like standard practice?
No, it's newer evidence, so I just don't think guidelines have started reflecting it yet. However, I'm not sure about Europe, but I know in America, the USA, and here, it's not part of the first line recommendations.
And I think, just Ali, there's just not enough evidence yet to support it.
Yeah.
There's lots of great evidence coming out that's saying hormone therapy in the perimenopausal years has a good effect on depression and low mood. But there's just not enough for them to be able to like, wow, yeah, there's so much robust evidence. Like, you know, for hot flashes, they can say without a doubt for like 90% of women, this is effective. It's first line. But they just don't have enough evidence to support it yet. But it is coming, which is great. But we're just way behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.